Hi, my fellow panelists. Hi, Savita, Rajgopal, and Dilpreet.
Yeah,
Actually, we had a long 3 or 4 question agenda today, but given the fact that we are a little hard pressed for time, I'm going to do the opening, and we'll probably take one question if that's okay with my fellow panelists, and see how that goes first, because I think it's fair to also have the audience come in if at all we can to in the last 5 to 7 minutes. Sri Lakshmi, can you just put up that slide if that's so? I think the topic is interesting, customer data. But before that, I just wanted to talk just of data in its purest form. And I was just reading some statistics, which is absolutely mind-boggling. I heard of gigabytes of data, and as Rajgopal, Savita, and Dilpreet would understand that the word now is zettabytes or zettabytes, right? And some of the figures, do you know that in a day, there's close to 294, close to 300 billion emails that are sent? Yeah, I mean, if that's visible to you, 300 billion emails sent, 103 billion spam mails a day. Facebook does close to 4 petabytes of data in a day with 350 million photos and 100 million hours of video or photo chats. The latest thing, wearable technology, the watches that we wear itself is 28 petabytes of data in its nascent form today. And all this has happened in the last 2 years. I mean, it's simply mind-boggling, to be honest, the kind of data that exists. And all this is customer data at the end of the day. I've got a very diverse panel from B2B. We also had a panelist who had to drop out, Mohammad Qazi, who came in the sandwich of the SMB layer. And then we have, of course, the B2C, Dilpreet and Rajgopal. I'm going to start the first question with you, Savita, if that's okay with you. And my question is, typical of data, what we've learned is if there is garbage in, there's garbage out. And unfortunately, people focus on the quantum of data and not the quality of data. And I think the importance, and since you come from an industry, the Royal Dutch Shell, which you're in currently, it is B2B, high-end, a lot of stories about G when big data was happening and how they were making sense of data. My question to you and to my fellow, and subsequent panelists is, what kind of a roadmap did your organization take to make sense or make sure that the data was of the highest quality at a base level? That was the first part of the question. And the second, how did it help your business to take informed decisions, either in a business decision or improving process of products? Savita, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Ajay. Privileged to be here. Today, like we're talking about different aspects of data, what I want to do is really make it come home with some of the work that I and my team have been leading in Shell. Shell's data journey has been centered around building a 360 view of customer. And if you break that down, at the first step is this requires building an enterprise-wide view of existing customer relationship to help the sales team understand some of the basic questions like, who else from Shell is talking to me? And from there on, you start to build a common view of the sales pipeline that helps you understand the customer needs. And then, from there on, you sort of work towards meeting those needs with customer-centric offers. However, I mean, these questions look very basic, but these are new set of questions because historically, and even today, Shell is largely organized around products and not around customers. And in these questions, you will see two themes surfacing. One, these are internally focused questions, and they're extremely basic in nature. Something that if, as a central program team, we were to devise by ourselves, we would never think of these questions. And our thought process would be more sort of, eclectic and sophisticated in terms of, how do you do cross-sell and upsell, etc. But they also point towards the basic gap that exists today across the data silos, as well as the data quality. And I think my learning from being a part of this program The two most critical learnings have been chase the business value and don't start to work on the data till it is clear what business questions need answering and why. The second is that there is no real shortcut to building a clean and robust data foundation. Without that, it is garbage in, garbage out, like Ajay, you were saying. We've struggled for years in Shell to be able to scale digitalization and make good on the promise of it with any material value discovery. And that has been because these have been, we haven't put our money where our mouth is in terms of building a sound data foundation. So this time around, with the focus on customer centricity, really the effort is to build robust and clean data foundation, and then use that to build new revenue models, new way of engaging with customers, et cetera, because from there on, you can chase the value, you can scale it globally. And like you said, we all know that we all live in a sea of data. Dearth of customer data is not an issue today.
Yeah.
And with that comes the temptation to clean it all up. And I would strongly resist that temptation. Like they say that let the sleeping dogs lie. If your unclean data isn't getting into your way today, don't bother to touch it. Focus on only what needs to be cleaned to deliver that business value, which has been clearly articulated upfront, and go after with it with discipline, strong business ownership of the data, and strong governance. Because every time you touch data, it costs us money. And without the clarity of purpose, it quickly becomes a very futile exercise.
And money
So
down the drain.
I'm gonna stop at that. And in the interest of time, let's hear it from others.
Yeah, in fact, I had some interesting follow-up questions in the organization that you're with. Uh, Energy transition to a cleaner and greener world. Very interesting, because a source to that would have been in some form that, hey, let's look at what our B2B big clients are talking about, and there's a direct business correlation to an outcome, which results in a healthier bottom line. But I'll come back to that. Thanks a lot,
Sure.
Savita. Now I'd like Dilpreet, again, interesting B2C hospitality. The same question for you, Dilpreet, if you can give us your take on it.
Sure. So you're talking about the hospitality industry. So I would say it's completely experience driven and service driven. So like I would say till 5 to 7 years back, the only focus, it is a core focus when you're talking about the service. But at that point of time, when you talk about the data, so like it was basically, I would say, the legacy systems which all the hotels are working on. So like their basic objective is being met, whereas all the reservations are flowing, all the reservations are being viewed by the ops person, and yeah, that was fine. But like when I talk about the customer data or the CRM data which is there, so like what we have done is that we have just created a CRM layer on the top of the PMSs and the Opera system which we are having. So that is talking to all the property management system, wherein the transactional data, the profile data, the social data, I would say the behavioral data in terms of how person is behaving in terms of the campaigns which is getting, what kind of engagement the person is having once he is part of the loyalty program. So all the data is flowing into the CRM system, and we are getting a unified view of the customer. Because if you are talking about a complete, I would say, data life cycle, then it starts with the raw data, then it moves to the information, then the insights, and then the impact. So if you have something like impact in mind, then you need to work on the data. So it's just as simple as it. Like I would say, like the best thing which has happened to a marketer in the last, I would say 10 or 15 years is the adoption to the mass internet, by which the data like the web, your World Wide Web, your LinkedIn data, your social data, your email data, which you are getting, so that is there. And also like I would say the rule, one of the rule is that when you are having scarcity of the resources, then you tend to use it wisely. But in this case, the data is in abundance. So people are like, okay, I have that also, I have this also. So how I should be using that thing? So in that case, the optimization is very much required. Now, when you're talking about the garbage data or the bad data, so like I would be categorizing that into like, and again, like mainly it is pertaining to the hospitality industry, but most of the time it will be valid for other industries also. So the first one would definitely be the incomplete information. So like you are having the guest profile, but in that case, either you are not having a title, you are not having the last name, or sometimes the email ID is not there. So like for some point of view, like if your objective is that you want to reach out to the guest with certain communication, so the purpose is not met. That is one part. The second thing is the inaccurate information which is there. So like taking the same example, let's suppose you are having a guest profile, but in that case the title is not there. So you will not be able to reach out to the person with a proper salutation. So in that case also you have to take a call whether to reach or not, what should be the mechanism which you will run. Even if you are having a complete tech infrastructure or the automation in place, you just can't rely on that unless and until you have clarity in your mind that what kind of cleanliness and the hygiene you want to maintain at your data level. That is the second part. The third part would be the unstructured data. So like many a times, like when you are working on the CRM data fields or so, like sometimes the data would be there in I would say text format, sometimes it will be the number format. So like again, the clarity would be there. So the structuring of the data is very much important. The last part would be the outdated data. So like you have updated the data some 5 years back, until now no one has taken the pain to work on that data, and you have been using the data. There could be a possibility the person has moved to another company, he has changed his email ID or something like that, but unless and until you don't have a proper information, you don't have the correct information, again that is of no use to you. So that is one part. And when you're talking about like all these data analysts, data scientists, so I would say the truth is almost 50 to 55% of the time they are just spending in cleaning the data, maintaining the hygiene of the data, and standardizing the data. So that is something which you need to work on. So that is, I would say, the garbage in, garbage out. Again, that is something which is not going to happen overnight or in few days. So like what you need to do is that you need to prioritize that. So what could be a, in a simple term, it should be like you need to do the bucketing. Okay, so like this kind of the data, it is critical for my business, and at any cost I need to clean that data. I need to maintain proper sanitization of that data. That could be one. The second could be the watch. The watch category could be, even if I'm getting the data, that's fine. If not, then at this point of time, it is not impacting my business. But at a later stage, I would be needing that thing. Third would be ignore. So unless and until you don't prioritize, you just focus on everything, you will not be able to get the stuff which you're looking for.
Great. Dilpreet and I, of course, have had multiple discussions on forums since we both share a hospitality background. Dilpreet, I feel fossilized from your time. 1992, when I started my career in hotels, we were just getting onto a computerized system. So I know you've skipped almost 92 to 2005 or 2010 when data is available and you can build a layer. At that time, we had guest history on manual cards. And we actually sat and manually typed that into a so-called computerized hotel lodging system or computerized system at that time. So I belong to that era when it didn't exist. And that is much before the internet also came in. But it's tremendous to see. And I think both you and Savita have, I think the point is valid that data is available. Its sense of garbage or non-garbage is only dependent on what
Objectives,
outcome you want as a business, and it's always good to keep the data.
True.
It'll always come in good stead. It may, but since you have the data, there's no harm in keeping it and using it as applicable for the business outcome that you need at that point in time. So you spend your dollars wisely, as you all have both rightly said. Rajgopal, I'd like you to come in. You've spent time, of course. You're with Zoop, your own, and I'm assuming it's a brand new company. It's in a stealth mode kind, so. Not much information that I could gather, except that you're in the stomach-pleasing business for all of us. Yeah. Prior to that, of course, you spent time with Ola and with CureFit. Again, a very, very, very retail-driven environment, brick and mortar kind of environment. Data again being king, but would love to have your thoughts.
Totally, yeah. Sure. Like you said, Ajay, there's not much to talk about my current company. It's set to be launched. It's just 3 months old. But I would mostly draw my thoughts and experiences from the last 2 companies where I got to engineer the customer experience by quite a bit, right? So that's CureFit and LivSpace. So like Savita actually coming from a very different industry, she also pointed out to 360-degree view of each customer, right? So that's pretty much been the key throughout the journey of 2 companies in the last 5 years. Giving a 360-degree view of the customer is what makes a customer service person or whoever is in direct touch with customer intelligent. Ultimately, a customer wants to interact with someone who's intelligent, who's understanding, who shows empathy. And this person, you can't expect this person to show any empathy to the customer if we don't, as a company, show empathy to that person and empower them with data, right? So when it comes to data, there are two parts to it again. If you were to look at it as, let's say, information and context, you could always load up a person with a lot of information, and that is still to be considered garbage. The customer service professional or whoever is doing the first line of contact with the customer sees a lot of information but can't act on it because they lack context, and it's still garbage for that person, right? So they can't appear intelligent. So the most important thing that's been different from the, let's say, last 5 years of my journey versus the last 2 years of my journey has been the importance of context. Just to give a couple of additional examples to emphasize this even further, think about where we were buying, let's say, daily essentials from. Like, let's say, a cable operator used to be the, let's say, cable Ravi down the road. And he knew everyone in our family. He knew who watches what channel. He knew that there was this, let's say, 5-year-old kid. So Cartoon Network is must, and so on and so forth. And similarly, the milk delivery guy knew a lot of context. You could always pick up your call and ask him, why didn't my milk come? When are you coming? Are you actually coming? And now each of these services, as they move to a centralized, organized player, all the context goes for a toss, though a lot of, let's say, efficiencies kick in terms of operationalization and logistics, right? So this kind of puts us in a very strange situation where every customer is interacting with a central customer care person or a touch point who lacks a lot of context. So context becomes really important. Again, when I mean context, as soon as a customer calls in, where is this customer currently in? What are the things that are lacking? I'll give you a concrete example on this. Let's take my journey with LiveSpace. LiveSpace is an interior design company. People are making, let's say, their purchase of a lifetime, spending roughly anywhere between 8 lakhs to 20 lakhs from their pockets. And the journey is going to take about 4 months or 5 months net before their home gets fully ready and delivered. And they're going to be in touch with close to 30 to 40 different people. They're going to be in touch with the company 30 to 40 times over these 40 months. And they're going to be in touch with at least 10 different people through this entire journey. So 100 things could go wrong if so many touch points exist and they're all disconnected people. It's really important for anyone interfacing with this customer to have context about all the interactions that have happened with every person in the company, and the status of the project at any given point in time, etc., to be able to give the right information at the right time. So, and that is what makes this 360-degree view of a customer, which involves both information and contextually bubbling up the most important information on top so that the person could actually act on it. Whoever is interfacing could act on it. And it's not just seeing, like, let's say, 100 data points about the user, right? I'll stop there, and let's say if you have any further questions, deep dive into specific areas.
No, it's interesting, Rajgopal. In fact, I was writing it down while you were speaking. One of the conferences I spoke on, again, it came to data. And one of the points I highlighted was the first person to control as far as good data goes is your marketing guy. Because the marketing guy wants a lot of data.
True.
You know, so in the industry that I'm in, LiveSpace that you work in, it complements real estate, the current industry that I'm in. We realized when we actually forced at gunpoint the marketing guy, we reduced 70 fields to 25 and 30 fields, saying this is very critical. 70 is what I want to have, but I can go to 100 also. And we reduced it because 25 was most critical. The point, how much is a customer willing to, in today's time where they have less time, how much information are they willing to share upfront? And then there is a strategy around it that you collect 25 now. The holy grail is not get all 100. And then over a lifetime of the customer, you add 10, add 10, add 10, add 10, your data will get rich. But so that's one very interesting battle that I thought. Great. I want to come back to the second question, given the paucity of time. This is about the fear of data security and privacy. I think this holds good for any data. The eventuality is the security and privacy of the data. And just to share a statistic done by Harvard, where they surveyed businesses to find out what do you feel, how secure is your data with different industries. The highest, of course, was with primary care and doctors with 87%. And at the lowest was social media companies at 56%. Confidence that my data will not be compromised. And we all understand data is all about trust, right? BFSI and banks came in the mid sector of 76%. I just wanted, because it's a very important topic, GDPR in Europe and in India also now we will have our own very soon. Savita, would you like to take a shot at what is built around data security within your organization? Because that, how do you secure your customers' privacy and his data? Some thoughts on that.
Yeah, we live in very interesting times because on one side, the slide that you were showing earlier talks about how willingly we, each one of us as consumers and users, very willingly are sharing so much about ourselves with pictures, with videos, with whatnot. On the other side, the misuse of data with the cyber incidents is up through the roof. And, it shows up in the spend that companies have raked up in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. It also shows up in the kind of litigations and lawsuits that are coming across. And then on top of that, you've got the challenge of increasing protectionism and more and more of the totalitarian regime wanting to know everything about you, and alongside that is the whole data regulation piece around, like the GDPR and GDPR. I mean, Europe is not the only one. Now you've got more countries that actually want to keep the data first within before you share it out, and it is an absolute nightmare for the companies. And now these are all the sort of everything that I just spoke about is really about locking down the data. Now you compare it with what we've talked about earlier, the need to have clean, rich data, convert it into from actions to, from insights to action, convert them into revenue, et cetera, which is the other end of the spectrum. And there is this constant tension along the two. And it's about the slide rule, where to dial back, where to dial up. And the vigilance around it has to play out on multiple levels. So companies like Shell, large, rich, profitable companies, very, very big brand values, are not short on resources. Standing up the resources, whether it is for cyber defense or whether it is for information risk management or whether it is the whole governance that is required to go along with it. I think, but even companies like ours struggle, to build that balance, in terms of not locking up data because you're scared it'll get misused, but at the same time having enough safeguards which are constantly audited. You've got strong governance framework, to ensure that A, the data does not fall into the wrong hands. B, your trust with your consumer is not broken. So anytime you're looking at sharing the data, you have an explicit policy out there, not a 50-page document in microprints, and you take the permission first before you go share that data. So, you've got these multi-dimensional challenges that are coming up. I think the one shift that is needed, and which is a very fundamental shift, and other things start to build upon it, is truly treating data like an asset, like a business asset, not any different than how employees are an asset, or the buildings are an asset, or our products are an asset, because we do that today for everything else that the business treats as an asset. Companies have policies and guidelines and frameworks and safety net around how to keep the employees safe. Data is intangible. So, and it's a newer sort of muscle for the business also. But to me, it starts there. It starts with educating the business, helping them understand why, it's not, it doesn't stop at I need data. It really is business. Data is an asset. And how do I treat it as an asset? With care, nurture it, stay on top of it, govern it, and then you build your policies from there on, to ensure that you're constantly balancing. and you are leaning from what is need to know, especially when it comes to first party data. You are leading with what you need to know, not what everything you know. Like you said, right, marketeers would love to have not 70 but 100 fields.
Yeah, that
But
is
they also know that what is the absolute minimum that you need to know, and where can you surmise, you know, with aggregated personas or behaviors, and not have to go down to the first data. Um, so there are these guiding principles, and they're often conflicting for a real reason. But these guiding principles and the frameworks need to become more and more sort of imbibed and understood, and start with that principle of truly data is a business asset. So how do you take care of that asset? And I think that's the beginning, and the foundational level. There's a lot more sophistication that needs to be built on top, but I think that's where I see the biggest change that needs to happen for the companies to learn that balance between locking up the data and keeping it safe.
Great point, Savita. Rajgopal, interesting in your environment that you have not just the end consumer, but you have people in between, in an environment where you have a franchisee-led business model, typical of any business, that it's not necessarily only direct to a consumer, but you have in between. How do you ensure data security in an environment where you have not just a direct consumer, but also franchisees who depend on your data to, to carry out their business and yet protect the data?
Sure. So again, and there's an example from LiveSpace that I could come up with here. So LiveSpace model works this way. There are a lot of designers who are part of the marketplace. They're all freelancers working with us who are pretty much, let's say, people who understand end consumers' needs, their entire family's needs, and then translate it into a set of requirements that could be acted upon. And there are fulfillment professionals like, let's say, people who do installation at site, electrical work at site, and so on and so forth, who also could be from outside the company. And there are, again, two parts to how this is handled. When it comes to external facing parties like these, it is fairly easy. The way they access data is going to be through very regulated gateways of data. And these gateways are constantly audited. And this is a common practice across, let's say, multiple industries. Take, for example, medicine industry, you have HIPAA compliance, and there you again have these audits around data gateways. And same with most other PA data when it comes to payment and other industries. So one lever is through audit. The second lever, which is not so much relevant with respect to, let's say, interfacing with franchisees, but while dealing with, let's say, internal consumers of data itself. Like Savita was saying, your marketing team would want, let's say, 100 data points, and at all times you would need to ask them what are the few things that they want. One other thing that works in smaller setups, while this might not scale up to a larger setup, is that a company could establish the guidelines through processes and a variety of guidelines and, let's say, approvals. And on the other hand, a smaller company could do the same thing through the culture itself. If the culture is exhibited in a certain way and everyone sees that this is my culture, they start behaving in a certain way. In fact, without disclosing the name of the company, one of the companies that I worked in used to have a form which nobody audits, but would just ask, why do you want this data whenever they place a request for a data. And just by virtue of asking this question and people having to type it in, they used to ask for, let's say, minimal data at every point. Because the culture of the company says that you should, let's say, only do things that you could explain to the customer with a straight face, right? And when that becomes part of the culture, everyone thinks twice. Oh, I'm typing in a reason. I better be, let's say, justifying the reason I'm asking these 5 data points for. If I can't justify, I shouldn't even ask, right? So that's the power of the culture trickling down into every, let's say, unit of the organization.
Thanks. Dilpreet?
Yep. Okay, so I'll just take it in 2 parts. So, like, firstly, when it comes to the data collection, so I believe one of the biggest reason why your data collection strategy fails is, number one, you are not aware about your objective for which you are collecting the data. The second thing is you are not able to convey the same thing to the consumer also, that why you need the data, why you are asking for that thing. So again, the first thing is you need to have an objective in mind. Second thing is like, don't be in hurry to collect the data in one go. You have to set the priorities. So like the thing is that, again, as I said, that all the critical data which is there, which you need from the consumer, just go for that, build a connect with the consumer, and then with a flow, start getting the data, because by doing that, so the probability of getting the data and the good quality data, it's quite high as compared to you asking for the data and getting it in the first go. That is the first part. The second thing is like, when it comes to the data management, when you have the data in place, then certain basic hygiene factors needs to be maintained, like starting from the encryption, which would be there. Like if I just talk about our brand specifically, so like how it works is that the data resides in the PMS system, which is there. When it's coming to the CRM, so like again, it is a filtered data which is coming. So like what we do is that, like if I just take example of the communication, so our communication is completely consent based. It's not that whosoever has come to my hotels, we will be kind of sending the communication to them. We will be asking for their consent for sending the communication. For all the people for whom we have got the consent, we will only be sending communication to them. So the first level, I would say, the filter which is there is that from Opera, the data would be coming into my CRM data as a communicable data only for the people who have given us the consent. That is one. The second thing is like, as a brand, you need to reduce the friction between the technology and the business objective. So like once you have your business objective in place, you know that what kind of data you need to build your systems so strong that data is not flowing out of the organization. We also work with business partners. So how it works is that all the business partners, they are coming onto our server and working. So none of the data point is going out of the organization. So this is something which I would say the best practices which you need to develop to make sure that your data hygiene is also maintained and the data security is also in sync with that.
Great, thanks. Like I promised, I will not keep you all too long. I think we had a lot more questions to answer, but I think it is fair to pick a couple of questions from the audience. The first question that I have here is, with GDPR and other stringent privacy policies, how can marketers strike the balance between privacy and personalization? Who would like to take a shot at it?
So as I said, be it the GDPR or so, like I would say, like one thing is the law is in place. That doesn't mean that then you have to respect the privacy of the consumer. Even if the law is not there, as a responsible brand, you have to take care of that part. That is one. So like again, the thing where I was talking about the consent-based communication, making sure that the onus lies with the brand when they are collecting the data, the first-party data when they are collecting. So the onus lies with them to make sure that the data is secure. They have to build an ecosystem wherein the data security is being maintained.
I have a couple of points, insights that I've learned. Again, one from my own experience, and the other very interesting insight on a conference like this seminar that I attended. Let me give you a couple of insights. One, again, from hotels that I've learned in technology and currently in real estate. One simple thing to do is remove all access to list-based reports. That's honestly, the simplest low-hanging fruit that one can do is that there is no list-based report which marries customer's address with his email address and phone number. It is the easiest source to have data like this, go out in the market, and we've seen plenty of that happen. And of course, then there must be access rights to people, access control to who can access that and why is it needed. So simple mandate that I did in the organization I worked with is that permission to take any list is only with the MD and CEO. At the end, he's the one who holds the customer's mantle, so to speak. So that reduces anybody asking for data at any point in time. Mm-hmm. In one of the seminars, it was very interesting. When this GDPR and the Indian, it was supposed to go through the parliament, it's not yet done, the Indian standard for the similar point. A courier company. Now, if you realize courier companies, the way they actually have worked or the post is that they have a whole list which is printed out every day and given to them. And that list has got the address, the phone number, and possibly the email address, but at least the phone number and the address. And the minute this GDPR came into force, the courier company was suddenly, the client stopped saying that, sorry, we can't give you the list. Now, how does the courier guy, poor guy who's going to do a delivery, deliver if he does not have the address? So, and of course, the phone number to call. I think that's where the play between technology has a huge role to play in that. So they, like Uber and Ola, Rajgopal, we know of Ola, that the simple thing to do is the guy was given the list with the address, but no number. he was given a PIN number. So when he arrived at close to the address, he called a toll-free number and he put in his PIN number, so that authenticated as the right guy who was approaching. And he was still not given the number. He was connected to the customer. So the customer's data was still confidential, stayed in the database of the organization, but the job got done cleanly, and there was no impact. I think that is a solution. More than anything else is to find or leverage technology, because technology has a lot of answers that can address the problem of not circumventing, but protecting your data and yet allowing you to continue business. If there are any other comments on this, if not, I'll just take the next question. What are some best practices when it comes to reusing data for cross-selling in retail? Interesting question. Rajgopal, would you like to?
Reusing data.
Reusing data for cross-selling in retail.
All right, yeah, sure. So in fact, this is a classic example of many technology features you see across, but I just don't realize that this is what is happening behind the scenes, right? On this front, you see a lot of features powered by machine learning are leading the way. If you go on Amazon, you look at a product detail page, or you land on your homepage, you're being targeted with a lot of these widgets which show products after products after products. These are based on data that they've collected about your past, let's say, view and purchase patterns. And that's powered by machine learning, and still, let's say, the data is kept safe and so on and so forth. And if you were to look at the service industries, to give you a couple of examples, let's say you bought let's say we know that you have a certain sofa and it requires replenishment of the pillows on it periodically. You could always, let's say, target that and be used to cross-sell, upsell products. And what one has. So there are, at Livspace, we have this, let's say, principle of sales and let's say upsales over a period of time. Let's say we sell a whole interior package for a person's home. You know that they're going to want some change in their home periodically, and it's a pleasant experience for the consumer when you offer them very relevant set of products that they could buy to suddenly, let's say, make the home look neat at a fraction of cost, right? It could be just a change of curtains and change of bedspreads and pillows. And with this, if you're able to reskin the interiors, it makes for a great experience. Similarly, if, let's say, you pick, if you walk into any cult center, you would notice that there are a bunch of Eat Fit kiosks. And these kiosks are, let's say, touch which goes in consensus with what the customer actually wants. I finished my exercise, I want, let's say, something to go with it. And bringing in the right set of recommendations for you to purchase there is a wonderful thing. So there could be a lot of contextual cross-sell, upsell, which the customer would also appreciate. While if we go overboard and try to do the same thing, it kind of hits the trust factor a little bit. It feels a little creepy. So we need to strike the balance at the right line.
Yeah, it's an interesting comment. While the question is specific to retail, but I think the modus operandi is irrespective of which industry you are in. In real estate, for example, as we were speaking yesterday, we had one of these cross-selling queries which came up. So we sell it to a retail customer who buys a home, and we also have an enterprise business that gives commercial leasing. So the question was, now if the data is rich, again, the core of this is the quality of data you have, that we sell 1 million, 2 million home. Obviously, the profile of the person at 1 million and 2 million is at a CXO or a CEO or a CTO at that level, because that's the person who can afford it. So if you have that kind of information of the organization he or she works for, the enterprise business can leverage that data to speak to them if they want to use or lease out space for their organization. So this is a very simple, crude way of cross using data within an organization and using it of value and not just calling everybody. So I think, again, it boils down to the quality of data that you have and for what purpose you want to use it. If anybody would like to add, Savita or Dilpreet, great. Otherwise, I can close it here.
Yeah, I
Savita,
think
please go
just
ahead. I think you
one,
had,
yeah, one comment I want to, which I'm teasing out from what Rajgopal and you've talked about. I think historically we think about data as wanting to get the data directly from the customer, and I want to use the two different context versus personal data are two different things. The more we can understand context, the less data you need from the customer. So, how do you define your user journeys very sharply? So you understand the context well, and the more you understand the context, the less data you need, and the more good quality data you get, the less data you need even more. So, shifting the focus towards understanding the context, the behavior, the next best action, the persona, starts to give you so much insight without really reaching out and asking for what else would you want to have with this. It becomes a lot more extendable, and you need less data. So I think enhancing the focus on context will help us also navigate away from the risk of asking too much data and the misuse of data that comes along with it.
Appreciate it.
Just to add one more point here, right? Over the last few years, most of the features that I discussed about, right, these are inspired from actual retail experiences. So whatever you see on e-commerce today are inspired by some of the other things that happens in the retail setting. For example, let's say you pick the best of salesmen. Like Savita said, this person observes a lot of context, and like you said, this person is able to gauge what, let's say, demography this consumer falls into, and he's able to contextually, let's say, cross-sell, upsell the right things. And that is what every e-commerce experience has tried to replicate. If, let's say, a black t-shirt is not available, recommend a green t-shirt and a red t-shirt if that in the right size. Recommend whatever is available in the right size. That's what a good salesman does, and that becomes a feature in your e-commerce. Now is the time to take back. So e-commerce has kind of taken a lot of these cues from your retail space and gone far ahead. Now it's time for retail to, I would say, pick up a lot of cues from e-commerce and bring it back into the salesman's hands, so that every salesman, so the website has to be as smart as the best salesman in the world, right? That's been the principle guiding every e-commerce feature. Now we need to bring it back to the retail salesman to a point where he's empowered with the right, let's say, tools, maybe through a tablet, through his mobile, through whatever means, where you're able to bring back, let's say, collective intelligence available about this customer into his hands, so that he could, let's say, act as good as the best salesman. And that's one line of, let's say, thinking that could empower retail leveraging data to cross-sell.
Very, 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 very apt, Rajgopal. I think on that note, we can probably close this session. My personal thanks to my fellow panelists, Dilpreet, Rajgopal, and Savita. Thank you so much, and Exido for having us on this panel. Sri Lakshmi, over to you.